It is September 2nd, 2025, and inside a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., Judge Amit Mehta is about to hand down a decision that could end with Google being forced to sell off one of the most valuable pieces of software on the planet. A year earlier, in August 2024, the same court had already ruled that Google illegally maintained a monopoly in internet search, not accused, not suspected, ruled in writing as a matter of law. And now the Department of Justice is asking for the harshest possible punishment available. Force Google to divest Chrome, the browser sitting on roughly 70% of the world's devices. The browser that quietly feeds Google's $2 trillion advertising machine every single time you open a tab. For a few tense months, the idea that Chrome could be pulled out of Google's hands entirely was not a rumor. It was an active, seriously argued legal proposal in front of a sitting federal judge. And it came from lawyers who had already proven, in the same courtroom, that Google broke the law to get where it is. That is not a normal week for a piece of software. That is a piece of software so central to one company's control over the internet that the United States government looked at it and said, breaking it apart might be the only way to fix the market. Judge Mehta ultimately declined to order the divestiture. He ruled that Google would not have to sell Chrome or Android, though the company would be barred from signing exclusive default deals with device makers and would be forced to share search data with rivals. Google's stock jumped 8% the moment the ruling landed, because Wall Street understood exactly how close the company had come to losing its front door to the internet. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. Weeks before that ruling came down, one of Google's own AI competitors, Perplexity, had publicly offered $34.5 billion to buy Chrome outright if the court forced a sale. A single browser with a bid that size hanging over it tells you everything about what Chrome actually is. It is not just an app icon on your desktop. It is the most valuable piece of real estate in the digital advertising economy, and it survived an attempt to break it up by the width of a single judge's opinion. I have to be honest about where I started, because I don't think this story lands if I pretend I was some outside skeptic from the beginning. I was a Chrome user for years, deep integration, the kind you don't even notice until you try to leave it. Google accounts synced across 3 devices, bookmarks organized exactly the way I like them, extensions layered on top of each other, Gmail pinned in tab 1, Google Drive in tab 2. It wasn't a browser to me. It was a workflow built up over years of small habits, and switching felt like unnecessary pain for a problem I wasn't sure I actually had. So, like most people, I did what most people do. I scrolled past the privacy headlines. I ignored the Chrome is eating your RAM jokes that show up in every tech forum. I kept clicking the same blue circle every morning because comfort is powerful. And Google has spent 2 decades making sure that comfort never gets interrupted. What actually broke that habit for me wasn't a single viral post. It was the divestiture case. Watching a federal court seriously entertain breaking up Chrome made me ask a question I'd never really asked before. What exactly am I opening every morning, and whose interests is it built to serve? So I spent weeks doing an audit I probably should have done years earlier. I went through benchmarks, privacy testing tools, security disclosure timelines, developer forums, and independent research from organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Then I tested 6 alternative browsers directly against Chrome, using identical conditions, across 5 categories that actually matter to a normal person in 2026. Memory efficiency, privacy architecture, raw speed, security response time, and how each browser actually fits into a real workday. Not marketing pages, not sponsored reviews, actual numbers, actual tests, weeks of actual daily use. What I found changed how I think about the app I open first every single morning, and I think it will do the same for you. Before the results, you need to know who made the list and why. I picked 6 browsers that represent genuinely different philosophies, rather than 6 clones of the same idea. Microsoft Edge, because it ships pre-installed on every Windows machine on Earth, and more importantly, because Microsoft has poured real engineering effort into differentiating it inside the Chromium ecosystem. Brave, because it has crossed 100 million monthly active users in 2026 and makes specific, testable, verifiable claims about privacy rather than vague marketing language. Firefox, the last major browser engine on the planet that isn't controlled by Google, which in 2026 matters more than it has in over a decade. Zen Browser, a newer Firefox-based project trying to rethink what a browser workspace should feel like. Vivaldi, which takes the opposite approach to minimalism entirely and builds itself around customization and control. And LibreWolf, the stripped-down Firefox variant that removes every trace of telemetry and built-in AI integration. The testing rules were identical for all 6. Fresh install, 0 extensions, 0 tweaks, nothing but default settings, because that is what 99% of people actually use. Almost nobody spends an evening hand-tuning their browser's privacy settings before their first coffee. Most people use whatever ships in the box, which means the defaults are the only numbers that actually matter. Here is something most people genuinely don't know about Chrome's defaults heading into 2026, and it matters for everything that follows. For years, Google publicly promised it was going to kill third-party cookies, the tiny tracking files that let advertisers follow you from site to site without your knowledge. It built an initiative called the Privacy Sandbox to replace them 6 years of development, and told regulators, advertisers, and users that the tracking-heavy version of the web was finally going away. Then, in April 2025, Google quietly reversed course, announcing it would not roll out any new prompt asking users about third-party cookies and would simply leave the existing settings buried where they already were. 6 months later, in October 2025, Google formally retired the remaining Privacy Sandbox APIs entirely, shutting down technologies like topics, attribution reporting, and protected audience, citing low industry adoption. 6 years of development, 5 delayed deadlines, and the entire cookieless future Google sold to the public simply evaporated. Third-party cookies remain active in Chrome by default heading into 2026, functioning almost exactly the way they did 5 years ago. The difference now is that Google walked back its own promise on its own timeline after telling everyone the fix was coming. That context matters. Because when I say certain browsers here are meaningfully better than Chrome, I'm not saying Chrome is slow or badly built. Chrome still works. Chrome is still fast. What I'm saying is that comfort and control stopped being the same thing a long time ago. And after going through every data point I could find, I no longer think the best browser available right now is Chrome. Start with the pain people feel before they understand it. Memory. You open 15 tabs, switch over to editing software, and your whole machine grinds down. Most people blame their laptop. Almost nobody blames the browser, even though the browser is usually where the slowdown actually starts. I ran a controlled memory test using 7 identical tabs across every browser, a news site, a paused YouTube video, a Google Doc, Reddit, a social feed, a product page, and a code repository. Nothing exotic, just the tabs an ordinary person has open on an average Tuesday. After 60 seconds of settling time, I measured total memory footprint, including every child process, with no extensions and no extra profiles running. Chrome landed at 2,290 megabytes for those 7 tabs. On a machine with 16 gigabytes of total memory, that is over 13% of your entire system gone before you have even opened a second application. And here's the detail that genuinely surprised me, even though I already knew about it in theory. When I closed the Reddit tab and reran the test, Chrome's memory usage did not drop. It actually crept up slightly. That behavior has a name: lazy garbage collection. Chrome allocates memory aggressively and releases it on its own internal schedule rather than the moment a resource is actually freed up, because the priority is making new tabs feel instant, not respecting how much of your system it's holding. On to. That is a design decision, and it tells you plainly whose experience Chrome is optimized around. Edge came in at 2,080 megabytes, meaningfully lighter than Chrome, and credit where it's due, Microsoft has done genuine engineering work since rebuilding Edge on Chromium, particularly with its sleeping tabs feature for long sessions. Firefox surprised me in the wrong direction, landing at 2,580 megabytes, the heaviest browser in the entire test, and higher than Chrome's own number. Firefox has made real strides in performance over the last 2 years, and now leads some benchmarks outright. But under this specific multi-tab load, it was the least efficient browser I tested. LibreWolf, essentially. Firefox with telemetry stripped out, came in just under its parent at roughly 2,430 megabytes. Zen landed at 2,310 megabytes, respectable for a project still in active development. Then there was Vivaldi at 1,980 megabytes, which genuinely impressed me, because Vivaldi is the single most feature-loaded browser in this comparison. It ships with a built-in mail client, calendar, feed reader, translation tool, and more customization depth than any browser has any right to offer. And yet, it still used less memory than Chrome out of the box. That isn't an accident. Vivaldi's target audience runs dozens of tabs and panels simultaneously, so the team has clearly prioritized memory discipline on purpose. But the number that actually stopped me was Brave. 1,010 megabytes. For the exact same 7 tabs that cost Chrome 2,290 megabytes, Brave used less than half the memory under identical conditions. I reran it multiple times because I didn't believe it the first time either. The result held. The explanation is architectural, not magic. Brave's add and tracker blocking is not an extension bolted on top of the browser. It's built directly into the browser at the C++ and Rust level underneath the entire extension system. When Brave loads a page, it never fetches the tracking scripts, the fingerprinting code, or the ad auction infrastructure that Chrome quietly loads and processes in the background. Less content downloaded, means fewer background processes running, which means dramatically less memory consumed. The efficiency gain is a direct byproduct of the privacy architecture, and that connection is genuinely elegant engineering. For speed, I used Speedometer 3.5 as the benchmark, currently the most respected real-world simulation available. Rather than isolating raw JavaScript execution, it simulates actual interactions inside real web applications, so the scores map more closely to what a page actually feels like to use. A 3-point gap in speedometer isn't something most people will consciously notice day to day, but the direction and the extremes are real. LibreWolf threw errors on every single run, most likely because its aggressive script blocking interferes with parts of the test itself, a fair reflection of a young project still prioritizing privacy, hardening over raw throughput. Firefox scored 33.8, solid and consistent, but trailing every Chromium-based browser in the test. Brave crossed the 40 mark at 40.5. Proving that all that privacy overhead costs essentially nothing in rendering speed. Vivaldi landed just above Brave at 41.2. Chrome scored 42.9, which is exactly what you'd expect from a browser Google has spent over a decade tuning. And Edge took first place outright at 44.1, helped along by deep Windows-level integration and Microsoft's continued investment in the Chromium engine. Here's the honest framing worth sitting with. Edge is the fastest browser in this test. Chrome is second. But Brave sits within 3 points of Chrome on raw speed while using less than half the memory and blocking every tracker on the page by default. You're not trading speed away to get privacy with Brave. You're getting the privacy essentially for free, subsidized by all the junk the browser never has to load in the first place. On ad-heavy pages, specifically, independent. Testing throughout 2026 has consistently found Brave loading such pages between 20 and 40% faster than Chrome. In real-world browsing, a gap synthetic lab benchmarks will never fully capture because they don't simulate the modern ad-saturated web. Speed and memory are things you feel immediately. Privacy is something that happens to you whether you notice it or not, and this is the category where the gap between Chrome and everyone else has become almost impossible to describe, without sounding alarmist, so I'll just let the data carry it. I use the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Cover Your Tracks tool, the most credible public fingerprinting and tracking test available, which checks 3 specific things. Whether the browser blocks tracking ads, whether it blocks invisible trackers that log your browsing without ever showing you an ad, and whether it exposes a unique fingerprint, the combination of screen resolution, installed fonts, time zone, and hardware details that can identify you individually across the entire web, even after every cookie has been cleared. Fingerprinting is the threat most people have never even heard of, and normal privacy settings simply cannot stop it. It requires the browser itself to actively resist it. Chrome failed every single category on default settings. No blocking of tracking ads, no blocking of invisible trackers, and a fully unique, fully exposed fingerprint handed over without resistance. That is Chrome, unmodified, straight out of the box heading into 2026, after years of promises about privacy improvements that never fully materialized. Firefox and Zen both landed in the middle, blocking some tracking ads and some invisible trackers, reflecting Mozilla's long-standing philosophy of balancing privacy with broad website compatibility, a reasonable approach with real limits. Both, however, still exposed a unique fingerprint in testing, even with their strong cookie partitioning architecture working in the background. Vivaldi cleanly blocked both tracking ads and invisible trackers, but failed the fingerprinting test. LibreWolf blocked ads and trackers by explicit design, but still leaked enough distinguishing data points to generate a trackable fingerprint. Brave was the only browser to pass every single category. Tracking ads blocked, invisible trackers blocked, and instead of exposing a static, unique fingerprint, Brave randomizes key fingerprinting values per session and per site, meaning a website actively trying to track you gets handed a slightly different, useless set of values every time. This connects to something larger than any single feature comparison, because the privacy conversation in 2026 isn't really about trackers and fingerprints in isolation. It's about a structural conflict of interest baked into what Chrome fundamentally is. Google earns the overwhelming majority of its revenue from targeted advertising, and Chrome functions simultaneously as a product you use and a data collection platform Google operates. Those two roles can never be fully separated. Every privacy feature Google has ever added to Chrome has been designed to preserve Google's own first-party advertising capability while limiting everyone else's third-party tracking. The Privacy Sandbox saga is the clearest possible proof of that pattern. 6 years of public promises, a quiet reversal in April 2025, then a full retirement of the technology in October 2025, once it became clear the replacement wasn't going to work well enough for anyone to bother adopting it. Third-party cookies remain active in Chrome by default, because removing them would have cost Google money, not because the company lacked the talent to finish the job. That isn't a conspiracy theory, it's simply a business model. But it means Chrome will always have a hard ceiling on how private it can realistically become, because genuine privacy and Google's revenue engine sit in direct tension. Brave doesn't carry that conflict. Mozilla doesn't carry that conflict. That structural difference is a big part of why the privacy testing results split the way they did. There's another piece of this extension users specifically need to understand. Manifest v3, the new extension framework, Google rolled out across Chrome. Google's official justification was security, giving extensions less invasive access to the browser. Critics, including the original developer of uBlock Origin, argued it was functionally an attack on effective ad blocking, since blocking ads at full strength directly threatens the advertising revenue that funds Google. The timing, the incentives, and the outcome all point the same direction, which makes the critics hard to dismiss. On Chrome today, the full version of uBlock Origin no longer functions as designed. What's left is a scaled-down variant called uBlock Origin Lite, constrained within Manifest v3's more restrictive rules. Firefox, by contrast, has explicitly committed to continuing support for the full Manifest v2 standard, a meaningful reason serious privacy-focused users still gravitate toward it. Brave sidesteps the fight entirely by building its blocking engine directly into the browser, beneath where Manifest v3 has any authority at all, so Brave's shields are completely unaffected by any of Chrome's extension policy changes, because they were never built as an extension to begin with. In January 2026, Brave overhauled its Rust-based ad blocking engine, cutting its own memory footprint by roughly 75%, a direct contributor to the RAM numbers you saw earlier. Security response time was the final objective category, and every browser in this test deserves real credit here. I tracked the latest critical security patches disclosed in early 2026 and measured how long each browser took to ship a fix after the underlying vulnerability became public. Chrome and Edge patched same day, expected given how close both cite to the Chromium engine. Brave was 1 day behind, a negligible exposure window. On the Gecko side, Firefox patched its critical vulnerabilities within days, with LibreWolf and Zen following within 24 to 48 hours of Firefox's own release. For a community-maintained project like LibreWolf, that turnaround is genuinely impressive. None of the 6 browsers here represent a meaningful security liability based on patch speed alone. Numbers tell you what a browser does. Daily use tells you what it actually is, and that's the part benchmarks can't measure. After collecting every data point, I used each of these 6 browsers as my primary driver for an extended stretch, genuine weeks of daily work, because a browser you resent using is a browser you won't stick with no matter how good its numbers look on paper. Edge genuinely surprised me. I expected the spiritual successor to Internet Explorer, and instead found capable, thoughtfully built software. The built-in Copilot sidebar turned out to be more useful than expected, letting you highlight a paragraph inside a research article and ask questions about it without leaving the page. A real workflow improvement rather than a gimmick. The vertical tabs layout is clean, and the collections feature for organizing research is something I kept using well after the review period ended. But Edge also carries Microsoft's fingerprints in ways that feel intrusive. Unsolicited, shopping suggestions, a newsfeed on the new tab page that takes real effort to disable, and privacy controls buried behind layers of settings menus. Edge is powerful software operated by a company with its own monetization agenda, and you feel that tension the longer you use it. Firefox genuinely impressed me on pure workflow. Its picture-in-picture implementation is the best of any browser I tested, popping a video out of its tab and letting it follow you around your entire workspace while you keep working, which sounds minor until you use it daily and then miss it the moment it's gone. Firefox also has the cleanest extension ecosystem for power users right now, especially post-Manifest v3. Since it remains the only major browser where the complete, unrestricted version of uBlock Origin still runs at full capacity. If your workflow leans on granular content control through extensions, Firefox is the technically correct answer in 2026. The interface isn't flashy, but it's honest, and browser honesty is genuinely underrated this year. Zen is building something worth watching, with split views and a sidebar design that feels like someone actually thought about how people use the web day to day, rather than just cloning an existing layout. But it isn't fully ready yet. The Android app remains unpolished. Memory usage under real load runs higher than a browser built around efficiency claims should tolerate, and the speed gap against Chromium-based browsers is still noticeable. I can't yet recommend it as a daily driver with a completely clear conscience. Vivaldi is arguably the most interesting browser in this entire test, and probably the least discussed in mainstream conversations. If you've ever looked at your browser and thought, I wish I could just build this the way I actually want it, Vivaldi is close to the answer. 2-level tab stacks, web panels that let you pin any site as a persistent sidebar, page tiling so 2 pages sit side by side in a single tab, a built-in mail client, calendar, feed reader, and customization depth so extensive you can adjust accent colors, button placement, and full toolbar layout from a visual settings panel. I spent 3 full days exploring Vivaldi and still hadn't found its edges. For a certain kind of power user, Vivaldi isn't really a browser at all. It's closer to a personal operating environment, and it came remarkably close to winning this comparison outright. If your priority is workflow control over privacy purity, it's a completely legitimate choice. LibreWolf is built for people who have essentially stopped trusting any single company, including Mozilla itself. It strips out every trace of telemetry from Firefox, removes all integrated AI features, and ships with the strictest default privacy. Posture of anything in this test. The trade-offs are real. No built-in sync, occasional broken benchmark tools, some websites behaving unpredictably, and an interface as bare as software gets in 2026. LibreWolf isn't really a mainstream product so much as a stance, and for most people it asks for more friction than they're willing to accept, because most people need a browser that works with the modern web as it exists, not as privacy advocates wish it were built. Which brings me to where all of this actually landed, and I want to give you a direct answer rather than a hedged non-conclusion, because you've sat through the numbers and you deserve one. The best browser right now in 2026 is Brave. It won memory efficiency by a margin that isn't close. It was the only browser to pass every single privacy test, including fingerprinting protection on completely default settings. It sits within striking distance of Chrome on raw speed while blocking every tracker. Chrome quietly loads without asking. Its Shields engine is fully immune to Manifest v3 because it was never built on top of the extension layer in the first place. And after weeks of daily use, it genuinely feels clean in a way Chrome hasn't felt in years. Pages loading without the visual jank of ads assembling piece by piece. A live shield counter in the toolbar quietly tallying everything it just blocked. Until after about a week, you become almost uncomfortable opening Chrome again and watching all of that tracking activity happen in plain sight. Brave isn't flawless. Its aggressive blocking can occasionally break individual site functionality. The built-in crypto wallet is unnecessary clutter for most users. And the Brave reward system, where you opt into privacy-respecting ads for a small crypto payout, will land as either interesting or mildly annoying depending on who you are. But these are paper cuts on an otherwise excellent product. Chrome's problems, by comparison, aren't paper cuts. They're architectural, structural, and baked directly into the business model of the world's largest advertising company, a company a federal court has already confirmed operated an illegal monopoly, and one that most people have simply never stopped to question because it's the icon. They've clicked every single morning without a second thought for years. If this breakdown changed how you think about the browser on your desktop right now, drop a comment and tell me which one you're switching to, because the comment section on a video like this is usually more interesting than the video itself. And if you're new here, this channel goes deep on exactly this kind of analysis, tech decisions that quietly shape your daily life, backed by real numbers instead of talking points. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.